Hi, Mystery Recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a romance fantasy movie called City of Angels. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens with a sick child lying in a room while her desperate mother attempts to treat her. We then notice a man named Seth watching the girl intently, and while she can see him, her mother cannot. The girl is eventually rushed to the hospital, where her condition doesn't appear to be improving. The doctors do everything they can to save her, but she ultimately passes away. Her soul then joins with Seth, and we discover that the man is actually an angel who watches over humans and protects them in unseen ways. His primary responsibility is to appear to those nearing death and guide them into the next life. Seth asks the girl what she likes most in the world, to which she answers pajamas. Later, we see numerous angels who are scattered all over the city. It is revealed that while the angels don't feel touch or other basic human senses, they can read humans' minds. That sounds like hell. Seth then arrives at a beach to watch the sunset with one of his fellow angels, Cassiel. He begins discussing the dead girl and how she asked him if she could be an angel with wings, but Cassiel says it's not possible, and that Seth should explain to her that angels are not human and never have been. At this moment, a heavenly sound fills the air as the sun finally goes down. Next, we meet a heart surgeon named Dr. Maggie, who arrives at the hospital on her bicycle. She then performs surgery on a man, but Seth is also present in the room, which means the patient is destined to die. When the patient's vitals begin to deteriorate, Maggie desperately tries to revive him. Seth informs her that the man will undoubtedly die, but Maggie stares at him and says he won't. This shocks the angel because humans are not supposed to see him. However, in the end, the man passes away, leaving Maggie devastated. She sits alone on the stairs and begins to cry in frustration. Seth also sits next to her and offers her comfort, but she doesn't seem to notice his presence. Later, Seth meets with Cassiel and asks if he has ever been seen by humans. The latter responds with a no, claiming only those he allows can see them. Seth insists that the doctor he met earlier saw him, but Cassiel says it is impossible and maybe he misunderstood. Seth then states he wants Maggie to see him, and when Cassiel asks why, he answers that he thinks she's hot and he simply wants to help her. The scene then cuts to Maggie, who is still devastated and unable to forgive herself for what happened. Jordan, her fellow doctor and boyfriend, reassures her that it is not her fault and comforts her. He also suggests that she go home and take a rest for the time being instead of stressing herself out. The two hug each other, and we notice that Seth is also in the room, and he feels sympathy for the poor woman. Later, as Maggie walks down the hospital corridor, Seth makes himself appear in front of her. He strikes up a conversation and reveals that he has come to see her, which surprises the doctor. He asks if she's okay, and Maggie reveals that she recently lost a patient. The angel then addresses her by her name and explains that people die when their bodies fail, and it's not her fault. He also informs her that the man is still alive, but not in the way she thinks. Confused, the doctor asks how he knows her name, so the angel points to her badge and leaves. Maggie then notices her badge and is shocked to discover that it only reveals her last name. Over the next few days, Seth continues to watch over Maggie while remaining invisible, and it seems like he is falling in love with her. He begins reading her mind and realizes that she is also constantly thinking about him. One night, Maggie wakes up to find a book on her nightstand and gets confused. She assumes it was a gift from her boyfriend to help calm her down. Maggie then begins reading the book with great interest and soon comes to enjoy it. However, the next day, when she mentions it to Jordan, he admits that he did not give it to her, leaving her puzzled. She should be terrified. Later, Maggie visits the library to find out who gave her the book, but the clerk is unable to tell her. Soon after, she comes across Seth again, and they begin happily chatting about the book she's reading. Maggie asks what he does for a living, and the angel reveals that he is God's messenger. Amused, she inquires as to what message he has for her, to which he responds that he has already given her. At this point, several angels appear in the library and stare at them, making Seth very uncomfortable.
Let me stalk this woman in peace.
He therefore suggests they go somewhere else, and Maggie readily agrees. The two then spend the day grocery shopping and having deep conversations about the meaning of death and their beliefs in heaven. In the evening, Maggie is called to the emergency room, where a patient named Messinger is choking on a tube. She works quickly to help him and eventually calms him down. Meanwhile, Seth is also present in the room, paying close attention. After everyone leaves, Messinger speaks aloud to Seth, revealing that he can feel his presence even though he cannot see him. This leaves the angel shocked,
I only want the women to see me.
and he decides to quietly leave the room. Soon after, Seth appears at Maggie's house, becoming invisible, and listens in on a conversation between her and her boyfriend. Maggie tells Jordan how she met someone named Seth and spent the day discussing the meaning of death and the afterlife. However, the guy just makes fun of her, asking if she's the kind of doctor who prays in the operating room. His words hurt Maggie a bit, so she quickly changes the subject. She then gets in the mood and engages in coitus with Jordan, making the angel feel extremely jealous.
I don't even have a dick.
Afterwards, Seth heads to the hospital and makes himself appear in front of Messinger. The two begin chatting, and it soon becomes clear that the old man is already aware of the angel's identity. He also realizes that Seth is in love with the doctor and jokingly teases him. The two then go to a nearby diner, where Seth questions the old man about how he knows his identity. Messinger finally reveals that he was once an angel who chose to become human. Seth doesn't believe him at first, but the old man explains that angels have free will. He says that if Seth wishes, he can also become human by jumping from a great height. The next evening, Seth takes the old man to the beach, where all the angels gather at sunset. When they arrive, Messinger no longer hears the heavenly sound, but instead jumps into the sea, feeling alive. He urges Seth to become human as well, but the latter appreciates being an angel and thinks about all the beauty he would miss if he became human. Days later, Seth meets with Maggie again, who has learned about his friendship with Messinger. She invites him to the old man's recovery party at his home, which Seth agrees to attend. During their conversation, he asks Maggie if she loves her boyfriend, but she doesn't know what to say. She then asks him why he always wears the same clothes and why he hasn't given her his phone number. She questions if he's married, but Seth denies it and suddenly kisses her. The angel, who can't feel anything, asks Maggie if she felt that, which leaves her even more confused. The scene then cuts to Messinger's party, where Seth is busy taking Polaroid photos with the old man's granddaughter. Meanwhile, Maggie tries to learn more about him from Messinger and asks how they met. The old man responds that he and Seth work together in construction, but she doesn't believe him. Later, when Maggie looks at the Polaroid pictures from earlier, she is shocked to see that Seth is nowhere to be seen. Instead of his image, there is only a bright light next to the little girl. Later, we see Maggie and Seth in the kitchen, where she asks him about his birthplace and his parents. The angel doesn't know how to answer, and he accidentally cuts his finger. Maggie then notices that he is not bleeding, so she intentionally cuts his hand again, but nothing happens. This freaks her out, and she angrily calls him a liar. With no other option, Seth finally comes clean and tells her the truth about his identity.
I'm a vampire.
He confesses that despite everything, he has fallen in love with her, but Maggie doesn't believe him and angrily asks him to leave, which he immediately does. Over the next few days, Maggie continues to think about Seth and becomes very sad. When she arrives at the hospital one morning, Jordan proposes to her out of nowhere. He delivers a heartfelt speech about why they would be ideal together and asks her to marry him. Maggie realizes that she doesn't love him, but still asks for some time to think about it. Later, the doctor meets with Messinger and questions why God allows some people to meet if they cannot be together. The old man then reveals that Seth is an angel of death who can't feel anything. No fear, no touch,
No orgasms?
no hunger, and he is immortal. However, Seth is willing to sacrifice all of this for Maggie because he loves her more than anything. Upon hearing this, the woman is shocked and asks how Messinger knows all of this. He then reveals that it is because he was once an angel himself who decided to become human. Afterward, Maggie goes to the library, where she finally meets Seth after several days. He is overjoyed to see her, but his mood shifts abruptly when she reveals that she has come to say goodbye. Maggie admits that Jordan has proposed to her, and she intends to accept it. Upon hearing this, Seth argues that she doesn't love him, but Maggie says it does not matter because they are both human. After saying this, she walks away from there. The angel boy is so devastated by the turn of events that he decides to take drastic action. He climbs to the top of a skyscraper under construction and jumps. Sometime later, when Seth finally awakens, he notices he is in severe pain and bleeding for the first time. This makes him extremely happy, as it means that he has finally become human. Without wasting any time, he rushes to the hospital to see Maggie, but the receptionist refuses to let him in without an appointment. Seth continues to insist until a doctor arrives arrives, who turns out to be Maggie's friend. She then reveals that Maggie has gone to her cabin in Lake Tahoe for a vacation with Jordan. Upon hearing this, Seth is a bit upset, but he still decides to take his shot. However, while on his way, he is approached by some thugs who brutally beat him up to rob him. Seth doesn't have any money, but they still take his shoes before finally letting him go. The injured man then stands by the road, asking for rides from several people. The majority of them proceed to ignore him until a kind stranger eventually agrees to help. After some time, Seth finally arrives at the cabin where he finds Maggie alone. She is shocked to see his wounded state and moved by the fact that he gave up his immortal life for her, but also somehow still not freaked out that he has been stalking her for ages now. While Maggie is tending to his wounds, Seth asks if he's too late and if she accepted Jordan, but Maggie reveals that she couldn't do it because she doesn't love him. This makes Seth very happy, even though she must be very sad, and he kisses her for the first time as a human. One thing leads to another, and they finally end up making love that night. The next morning, Seth takes a shower while Maggie prepares breakfast for them. She then decides to visit a nearby convenience store and do some shopping. While riding her bicycle back down the hill, she lets go of the handlebars and enjoys the feeling of happiness. But moments later, she unfortunately misses an incoming large truck and gets into an accident. Shortly after, Seth arrives at the scene and is distraught to see Maggie's condition. He decides to call the hospital, but she tells him not to bother. Maggie knows that she won't be able to make it and expresses her love for Seth. She apologizes for leaving him so soon, but Seth refuses to have this conversation. Maggie, who is dying, sees an angel beside her, whereas Seth, who is now an ordinary person, sees nothing. Nevertheless, he knows they are there and whispers to Maggie not to look at them. When the angel asks her what part of life she liked most, she answers, Seth, before passing away. Following Maggie's funeral, Seth falls into a deep depression and spends his days mourning his lost love. One evening, while sitting alone in the living room, he is suddenly visited by his former friend Cassiel. An emotional Seth asks if God punished him for what he did, but Cassiel responds with a no. Seth even accuses his friend of causing Maggie's death, but Cassiel tries to explain that he had no control over the situation. After the man finally calms down, Cassiel asks if he would have changed himself into a human if he had known how everything would turn out. In response, Seth says that he would rather have smelled Maggie's hair, kissed her on the lips, and touched her hand one time than spend an eternity without her. In the final scene, we see Seth standing on the ocean shore where the angels gather. He jumps into the water and decides to enjoy himself, knowing that despite everything, his life will go on and he will meet Maggie again someday. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.